The Boston Herald printing house at 4:30 in the morning possessed a particular quality of darkness. Not the absence of light, mind you, but a deliberate, industrial twilight, pierced by pools of harsh illumination where the night shift worked their mechanical miracles. Our man arrived, as he had for 20 years, through the employees' entrance on Washington Street, his lunch pail in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other, prepared by a wife who'd risen at 4 to see him off, though she'd never say it was a burden. He was 42 years old that October of 1945, though you'd think him older if you saw his hands, marked by countless small burns from hot type metal, stained permanently gray-black in the creases from printer's ink that no amount of lye soap could remove. A compositor, they called him in the official roster, but everyone who knew anything called him what he was: a linotype operator, master of a machine that stood 7 feet tall and weighed nearly a ton, a mechanical marvel that could transform molten lead into words, words into lines, lines into the columns of text that Boston would read over breakfast. The printing floor stretched out before him like a cathedral nave, its ceiling lost in shadows 30 feet above, where ventilation fans turned lazily, never quite clearing the fog of cigarette smoke and metal fumes. The smell hit you first. Hot lead mixed with machine oil, ink, and paper dust, underlaid with something else, something almost alive. It was the smell of stories being born. "Morning, Frankie," he nodded to the security guard, who sat reading yesterday's racing forms. The guard grunted without looking up. Class distinctions in the Herald building were as rigid as military ranks. Reporters and editors occupied the floors above, visiting the printing floor only when absolutely necessary, usually wearing expressions of distaste at the noise and grime. The pressmen, stereotypers, and compositors inhabited this lower realm, speaking a different language, living by different rhythms. He made his way to linotype number 7, his machine, for the past 12 years. Others might not notice the differences between the 32 linotypes arranged in rows across the floor, but he knew number 7's personality intimately. The slight catch in the keyboard when you struck the lowercase e, the particular ping of its casting mechanism, the way it ran a half-degree hotter than number 6 beside it. Tommy Sullivan was already at the neighboring flatbed press, checking paper alignment with the nervous energy of youth. 19 years old, fresh-faced, despite 6 months on the job, the boy carried himself with the peculiar mixture of bravado and uncertainty that marked young men who'd missed the war by a year or two. "Morning, sir," Tommy called out, always formal despite repeated invitations to drop the honorific. "Just another Tuesday, Tommy," he replied, beginning his ritual inspection of the linotype. Check the metal pot, 300 degrees Fahrenheit, perfect for the lead antimony tin alloy. Examine the magazine, where hundreds of brass matrices waited in channels, each carrying the mold for a single character. Test the keyboard. 90 keys arranged in neither alphabetical nor QWERTY order, but in the mysterious configuration known only to the initiated. The machine stood like a monument to the industrial age's marriage of precision and power. Invented in 1886 by Ottmar Mergenthaler, it had revolutionized printing, replacing the tedious hand setting of individual letters with a system that cast entire lines of type, hence linotype. Watching a skilled operator work was like watching a pianist perform, fingers dancing across keys while the machine responded with its symphony of clicks, whirs, and the satisfying chunk of hot metal pouring into molds. Eleanor Blackwood swept past on her way to the editorial elevator, her perfume briefly overwhelming the industrial smells. The Society columnist moved through the printing floor as if it were a necessary purgatory between the street and her third-floor office. She knew everyone who mattered in Boston, they said, and quite a few who thought they didn't matter, but did. The operator had set her columns for 15 years, knew her writing style, sharp observations hidden beneath velvet phrases, secrets encoded in seemingly innocent social notes.
"You're early today, Mrs. Blackwood," he observed. She paused, surprising him. Usually she acknowledged the printing staff as one might acknowledge furniture. "The Thought and Charity Gala," she said, as if that explained everything. "Mr. Thornton insists on reviewing my coverage personally." Her expression suggested opinions she wouldn't voice. As she continued toward the elevator, Frank DiMaggio emerged from his office, clipboard in hand, already into his second cigar of the day despite his wife's protests about his health. The foreman moved through the printing floor with the authority of a ship's captain, knowing every machine's capacity, every worker's strengths and weaknesses. "You're on financial section today," he told the operator. "Stock tables and commodity prices. Richardson called in sick again." The operator nodded, already calculating the extra work. Financial sections meant columns of numbers, requiring absolute precision. A misplaced decimal could cost someone thousands. It also meant setting copy about Thornton Industries, among others, those pillars of Boston commerce whose directors lived in Beacon Hill mansions while their workers crowded into Southie tenements. The great presses wouldn't start their thunder for another hour, but already the building hummed with preparatory energy. Copy boys, though some were men in their 60s, rushed between floors with last-minute corrections. Stereotypers prepared the curved plates that would actually touch paper. The whole elaborate dance that transformed events into news, news into type, type into the 100,000 copies that would spread across New England before noon. He settled onto his stool, adjusting it to the height he'd found perfect 2 decades ago, and began the day's work. His fingers found their position on the keyboard, and he started with the routine notices: births, deaths, marriages. Each line emerged from the machine as a slug of hot metal, reversed so it would print correctly, dropping into the galley with a satisfying clink. The machine's rhythm became his rhythm, thought and motion merging into something almost meditative. This was his world, had been since 1925, when he'd started as an apprentice, lying about his age to get the job. The Depression hadn't killed the newspapers. People needed their daily dose of catastrophe, perhaps especially then. The war had brought its own challenges: rationing of lead and antimony, younger workers drafted, the constant pressure to print news that wouldn't damage morale. Now, in victory's aftermath, the city was changing. Men returning from overseas wanted their old jobs back, or better ones. Women who'd kept everything running resisted being pushed back to kitchen and nursery. You could feel it in the stories that passed through his fingers: labor disputes, housing shortages, racial tensions in neighborhoods where Southern blacks had moved for wartime factory work. Young Tommy called out from his press, "You ever think about what we're doing here? I mean, really think about it?" The boy often grew philosophical during the quiet periods. "These words we're printing, they'll be in people's homes tomorrow, shaping what they think about the world." The operator smiled slightly. "I think about getting the kerning right and keeping the matrices clean. The rest is for men with cleaner hands than ours." But that wasn't entirely true. After 20 years of setting type, he'd developed an ability to read stories without reading them, absorbing their essence through his fingertips. He knew which reporters buried their leads, which editors changed meaning with a comma's placement, which stories carried truth and which merely carried what someone wanted to be true.
The morning shift was arriving now, the floor filling with familiar faces and voices. Sam Harrigan appeared, looking like he'd slept in his clothes, which he probably had. The crime reporter haunted the building at all hours, following police scandals and murder trials with the dedication of a medieval monk illuminating manuscripts. "You setting my piece on the Murphy trial today?" Sam asked, already knowing the answer. "Second page, below the fold," the operator confirmed. "Below the fold for a murder trial," Sam muttered. "This city's gotten too exciting when murder's below the fold." The linotype sang its mechanical song, and the operator lost himself in the rhythm, unaware that in 3 days, this same machine would begin telling its own story, spelling out a name that would resurrect the past and shake the foundations of Boston's carefully ordered present. But that Tuesday morning in October, it was simply another day in the cathedral of lead and ink, where words became physical things, and truth was measured in column inches. 3 days had passed since that ordinary Tuesday morning, and the operator sat at linotype number 7, setting the afternoon edition's financial pages. October 6th, 1945. The date would burn itself into his memory, though at the moment it seemed merely another Friday, distinguished only by the prospect of 2 days' rest ahead. The morning had brought its usual controlled chaos. Frank DiMaggio was arguing with someone from management about overtime pay, his voice carrying through the thin walls of his office. Tommy Sullivan had been unusually quiet, nursing what appeared to be a spectacular hangover from Thursday night's attempt to impress Mary Catherine O'Brien, the switchboard girl. The great presses rumbled in their rhythm, shaking the building down to its foundations every 45 seconds as another impression rolled through. He was deep in the stock tables, columns of abbreviated company names and numbers that meant fortune or ruin to someone, when it happened. His fingers moved automatically. Boston Edison, 32 3/4, up an eighth. New England Telegraph, 14 1/2, unchanged. His eyes scanned ahead to the next line while his fingers finished the current one. The satisfying chunk of hot metal dropping into the galley marked each completed line. Then he saw it. Between the stock listings, where no text should exist, lay a slug of type he hadn't set. The letters, reversed in the metal as all type must be, spelled out clearly, Walter Krauss. He stopped, fingers suspended above the keyboard. The rational mind immediately supplied explanations. Someone's correction mixed into his galley, a piece from another job. But he knew every slug in that galley. He'd set them all in the past hour, could recite the companies in order. This name didn't belong to the financial section, didn't belong anywhere in today's paper. He picked up the slug, still warm from casting. The weight felt right, the edges sharp and clean, freshly made, not some old type that had somehow migrated from another galley. The letters were perfectly formed, the spacing exact. Professional work, except he hadn't done it. "Tommy," he called to the young pressman, "you been near my galley?" Tommy looked up, bleary-eyed. "Haven't moved from this press all morning, sir. Why?" Instead of answering, the operator examined his machine. Everything appeared normal. The magazine full of matrices in their proper channels, the keyboard showing no signs of sticking, the casting mechanism operating smoothly. He set the mysterious slug aside and continued working, but his mind kept returning to those 12 letters in lead. 20 minutes later, it happened again. This time, he was certain.
His fingers had been setting Raytheon Corporation when he heard the familiar chunk of the casting mechanism, but his hands hadn't triggered it. The machine had cycled on its own, producing another slug, Walter Krauss. A chill ran through him, despite the floor's oppressive heat. In 20 years, he'd never seen a linotype operate without human command. The machines were purely mechanical, no electricity except for the heating element in the metal pot. Every action required deliberate physical input. Press a key, release a matrix, pull the casting lever. Ghosts didn't exist in the rational world of gears and cams. Sam Harrigan appeared at his elbow, drawn by some reporter's instinct for abnormality. "You look like you've seen Marley's ghost." The operator showed him the 2 slugs. "Machine's acting up. Cast these on its own." Sam picked up one of the slugs, squinting at the reversed letters. His expression changed, that subtle shift that marked recognition. Walter Krauss. Jesus Christ. "You know the name?" "Know it?" Sam laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I spent 3 months on that story back in '38. Accountant, worked for one of the big firms downtown. Vanished into thin air November 15th. Left a wife, no kids. Police gave up after 6 months. No body, no evidence of foul play, no embezzlement to explain running off." The operator felt the second slug's weight in his palm. "Why would his name show up in my machine?" "That's the $20 question, isn't it?" Sam's eyes had taken on the sharp focus that meant a story had hooked him. "You said the machine did this itself?" Before the operator could answer, Eleanor Blackwood's voice cut through the printing floor's din. She stood near the elevator, speaking with someone the operator couldn't see from his position. Her tone carried that particular mixture of charm and steel she used when extracting information from reluctant sources. Frank DiMaggio emerged from his office, cigar clenched between his teeth. "What's the holdup? We need those financial pages in 15 minutes. "Machine trouble," the operator said, which was true enough. Frank approached, his experienced eyes scanning the linotype for obvious problems. "Looks fine to me. You need maintenance?" "I'll handle it," Frank grunted, and moved on to harass the stereotypers. But Sam remained, turning the slug over in his fingers like a talisman. "Walter Krauss," he repeated. "Worked for Thornton Industries before he disappeared. In fact," he trailed off, lost in memory. "In fact what?" "Nothing proven, but there were rumors he'd found something in the books, discrepancies." "The kind of thing that gets accountants nervous, and possibly dead." The operator returned to his keyboard, determined to finish the financial section despite the mystery. But his fingers felt clumsy now, aware of every mechanical response from the machine. Each matrix, sliding down its channel, seemed louder, each line of hot metal heavier with potential meaning. At lunch, he walked to St. Stephen's Church, 3 blocks from the Herald Building. Not for prayer, he'd given that up during the Depression when prayers hadn't kept the banks from failing, but for the quiet. The October air carried hints of winter, and the trees on the common had begun their annual surrender to autumn. Inside the church, a woman knelt in the 3rd pew, her shoulders shaking slightly. Black dress, black veil, mourning clothes, though the war had ended 2 months ago. Some griefs didn't follow armistice schedules. As he turned to leave, she raised her head and he saw her face in profile. Pretty once, perhaps, but worn down by some persistent sorrow. Back at the Herald building, he found Tommy excitedly discussing the morning's events with anyone who'd listen.
"The machine typed a name by itself. I saw the slugs."
"Machines don't type by themselves," said one of the older pressmen. 40 years I've been doing this job. Never seen a ghost in the machinery." But by afternoon, word had spread through the printing floor. Workers found excuses to pass by linotype number 7, eyeing it with suspicion or curiosity. The operator continued his work, setting copy for the evening edition, but he kept the 2 slugs in his pocket, their weight a constant reminder of the impossible. Margaret Krause, for that's who the woman in the church had been, though the operator wouldn't learn this for certain until the following week, delivered a bundle of mended clothes to the Herald's administrative offices that afternoon. She moved through the building's lobby with the careful dignity of someone who'd fallen from a higher social position but refused to acknowledge the descent. The operator, returning from his lunch walk, held the door for her. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying traces of better times, education, perhaps music lessons in childhood. He watched her disappear into the elevator, wondering what story her presence might tell. Everyone who entered the Herald building carried stories, most of which would never see print. The building was a repository of the unwritten as much as the published, full of incidents too small, too personal, or too dangerous for public consumption. That evening, as the night shift took over, the operator cleaned his machine more thoroughly than usual, examining every component for signs of wear or damage that might explain the morning's mystery. He found nothing unusual. Number 7 remained the same reliable instrument it had always been. Sam Harrigan appeared as the operator prepared to leave. "I pulled the Krause file from the morgue," he said, referring to the newspaper's archive. "Want to know something interesting? The last story about his disappearance ran exactly 7 years ago today, October 6th, 1938. The coincidence sent another chill through the operator. In his pocket, the 2 slugs seemed to grow heavier. "What do you make of it?" "I don't believe in ghosts," Sam said, but his tone suggested uncertainty. "There's an explanation. There always is. The question is whether we want to find it." Walking home through the October evening, the operator considered the day's events. The rational part of his mind, the part that understood machinery and trusted in cause and effect, insisted there must be a mechanical explanation. But another part, older and less civilized, whispered that some messages demanded to be heard, even if it took 7 years and a ton of iron and lead to deliver them. Monday morning brought rain to Boston, the kind of persistent October drizzle that turned the printing floor's high windows into sheets of running gray. The operator arrived to find a cluster of workers gathered around linotype number 7, their voices carrying that particular tone of men trying to rationalize fear through mockery. "I'm telling you, it's haunted," Tommy Sullivan insisted, his young face flushed with excitement and something else. Genuine unease. "Father McCarthy says machines can hold spirits, especially if someone died violently near them." "Father McCarthy also says you shouldn't be drinking on weeknights," countered Joe Kowalski from number 6. "Maybe lay off the whiskey and the ghost stories." Frank DiMaggio pushed through the group, morning cigar already half consumed. "What's this, congregation? We running a seance or a newspaper?" The men dispersed reluctantly to their stations, but the operator noticed how they glanced back at his machine, how Tommy crossed himself when he thought no one was looking. Superstition spread through working men like typhoid through tenements, fast, virulent, and resistant to logic. He settled onto his stool and began the morning's inspection ritual, but with greater attention than usual. The magazine that held the brass matrices, he checked each channel, running his fingers along the rails that guided letters to the casting position. The keyboard, he depressed each key slowly, listening for unusual sounds. The camshaft that controlled the mechanical timing, he observed its rotation, looking for wear or wobble. It was there he found the first clue. Not obvious, nothing that would affect normal operation, but the cam that controlled the distribution mechanism showed unusual wear on one specific point. The kind of wear that suggested repeated stress at a particular angle, as if the shaft had been cycling through that position more often than it should. Sam Harrigan appeared at 9:30, looking marginally more presentable than usual, which meant he'd changed his shirt, if not his suit. "I've been digging through the morgue all weekend," he announced without preamble. Walter Krauss was onto something big before he disappeared. The operator continued examining the camshaft while Sam talked. The older man's voice had that quality reporters developed when they'd found a thread worth pulling. Urgent, but controlled, as if speaking too loudly might scare the story away. Krauss wasn't just any accountant. He specialized in municipal bonds, city contracts, the kind of boring financial stuff that makes millionaires if you know where the money's flowing. Sam pulled out a small notebook, pages covered in his cramped handwriting. 3 weeks before he vanished, he requested access to shipping manifests from 36, 37, and 38. Construction materials for the Sumner Tunnel project. What's suspicious about construction materials? Nothing, unless you're billing for Pennsylvania steel and using inferior stuff from God knows where. The kind of substitution that makes someone a fortune and maybe gets a few workers killed if the metal fails. The operator thought about the tunnel, that marvel of engineering connecting Boston to East Boston beneath the harbor. Thousands drove through it daily, trusting that the steel and concrete would hold back the weight of water and earth. Thornton Industries had those contracts, part of them, subcontracted through 3 other companies. But yes, Thornton's name is all over the paperwork. A commotion near the main presses drew their attention. Tommy Sullivan stood frozen beside the paper rolls, his face pale as fresh newsprint. One of the older pressmen was trying to calm him down, but the boy kept pointing at something on the floor. The operator and Sam went to investigate. There, in a puddle of machine oil that had leaked from the press, someone, or something, had traced letters. Not randomly, but deliberately. W-A-L-T-E-R. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, Tommy breathed. I just went to get more ink, came back, and there it was. Nobody else near here, I swear it. The operator knelt beside the oil puddle. The letters were formed by displacement, as if someone had dragged a finger through the oil. But the pattern of the displacement caught his attention. It matched the vibration pattern he'd noticed from the press when it ran at 3/4 speed, the frequency they used for the financial supplements. "It's not a ghost," he said quietly, but his voice carried. "It's resonance." The workers looked at him with expressions ranging from relief to disappointment. Tommy seemed almost crestfallen. "Resonance? The press vibrates at specific frequencies, depending on speed. Oil's viscous enough to hold patterns from those vibrations. Under the right conditions, it could form shapes that look like letters." It was a logical explanation, one that satisfied the rational mind. But it didn't explain why those particular letters, why now, why in conjunction with his linotype's mysterious behavior. The operator understood machinery intimately, knew that while resonance could create patterns, The probability of it spelling a specific name was astronomical. Eleanor Blackwood descended from the editorial floors around noon, an unusual occurrence that set the printing floor buzzing with speculation. She made her way directly to Sam Harrigan, her heels clicking against the concrete floor with metronomic precision. "Samuel," she said, her tone suggesting this wasn't a social visit.
"I hear you've been making inquiries about ancient history."
"News is news, Eleanor, whether it's 7 years old or 7 minutes. She studied him with those sharp eyes that missed nothing, that had cataloged every social indiscretion in Boston since the 20s. Some stories are better left buried. The Krauss matter was thoroughly investigated by the police. Funny thing about thorough investigations, Sam replied. They sometimes miss what someone pays them to miss. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture, a tightening that suggested Sam had touched a nerve. Be careful, Samuel. The war's over, but some battles continue in quieter ways. Mr. Thornton has been very generous to this newspaper, to all of us. After she left, the operator asked, "Is that a threat?" "That's Eleanor being Eleanor. She knows every secret in Boston society."
The question is, which one she chooses to tell, and which one she banks for future use. The afternoon brought new strangeness. The operator was setting type for the shipping news when he noticed his machine's rhythm had synchronized with the press Tommy was operating. Not unusual in itself. Machines in proximity often fell into harmony. But this synchronization was precise, mathematical. When Tommy's press hit certain frequencies, the operator could feel the vibrations travel through the floor, up his stool, into the linotype's frame. He began to map the relationship between the vibrations and his machine's behavior. At 1,500 impressions per hour, nothing unusual. At 1,200, a slight tremor in the magazine. But at exactly 1,140 impressions, a speed they used rarely, only for specific specialty runs, something extraordinary happened. The matrices in the magazine began to shift, not randomly, but in a pattern. The brass letters would work their way forward in their channels, some faster than others, until... "Mother of God," he whispered, watching as matrices for WALTER, KRAUSE aligned themselves at the release point. They hadn't dropped into the assembly position. That would require the keyboard to trigger them, but they were poised, ready, as if the machine was preparing to speak. He documented everything in the small notebook he kept for maintenance records. Frequency of the press, angle of vibration, time required for the matrices to align. It was repeatable, predictable, mechanical. Not supernatural, but perhaps something more unsettling, a cosmic coincidence of engineering that had created a mechanical oracle. As the evening shift arrived, the operator found himself reluctant to leave. He cleaned number 7 with unusual thoroughness, wiping down every surface, oiling every moving part. The machine sat silent under his ministrations, giving no sign of its strange capability. Margaret Krauss appeared again, delivering another bundle of mended clothes. This time she paused at the printing floor's entrance, perhaps drawn by curiosity, or perhaps by something else. That invisible pull the bereaved sometimes feel toward places connected to their lost. The operator watched her from his position, saw her eyes scan the enormous room with its rows of linotypes, its massive presses, its controlled chaos of production. What was she looking for? What did she hope to find in this cathedral of industry? "That's her,"
Sam said quietly, appearing at his shoulder. Walter's wife. Still wears black after 7 years. She comes here often? Twice a week, regular as clockwork. Takes in mending from half the newspaper staff. Good work, fair prices, and nobody mentions that she used to shop at Filene's instead of working for it. The operator thought about the cruelty of falling from comfort to subsistence, the daily reminders of what was lost. Does she know you're investigating her husband's disappearance? Not yet, but she will soon. This thing with your machine, the anniversary of his disappearance, it's all connected somehow. Call it reporter's instinct or Irish superstition, but I can feel it. That evening, walking home through the October darkness, the operator considered what he'd discovered. The machine's behavior had a rational explanation, but rationality didn't explain the timing, the convergence of factors that had waited 7 years to align. He thought about Walter Krauss, an accountant who'd discovered something worth dying for, and about the patient gravity of truth, how it pulled events toward revelation no matter how deeply they were buried. In his pocket, he still carried the 2 slugs bearing Krauss's name. Their weight, a reminder that some messages demanded delivery, whether through supernatural intervention or the blind mechanics of chance. Tomorrow, he decided, he would test his theory properly, document every variable. If machines could accidentally become mediums, what other secrets might they tell? Tuesday arrived crisp and clear, the October air sharp enough to cut through the perpetual fog of tobacco smoke and metal fumes on the printing floor. The operator had spent the previous evening at his kitchen table, filling pages with calculations, frequencies, angles, harmonic intervals. His wife had watched him work, saying nothing, accustomed after 20 years to his occasional obsessions with mechanical problems. He arrived at the Herald building an hour early, while the night shift still commanded the floor. The great presses slept, their silence making the space feel hollow, church-like. Only a few linotypes clattered away, setting type for the morning edition's final pages. Frank DiMaggio was already in his office, unusual for this hour. Through the window, the operator could see him speaking with someone in a dark suit. Management, by the look of the clothes and the uncomfortable way the man held himself in the industrial environment. Frank's expression suggested the conversation wasn't pleasant. The operator went straight to number 7, but also to Tommy's press, measuring the distance between them, 42 feet, 3 inches. He pulled out a ball of string he'd brought from home and ran it between the 2 machines, taut against the floor. The vibrations would travel through the concrete, through the iron frames bolted to it, creating a resonance pathway between press and linotype. "You're here early?" Eleanor Blackwood's voice startled him. She stood by the elevator, dressed for the day despite the hour. "Couldn't sleep either?" "Machine maintenance," he replied, which was partially true. She approached, her perfume preceding her. Gardenias today, expensive and somehow melancholy. "Mr. Thornton asked about the disturbances down here, the ghost stories. He's concerned they might affect productivity." "Since when does Joseph Thornton concern himself with printing floor productivity?" "Since his name started appearing in places it shouldn't." She studied him with those calculating eyes. "You're the one who found the name, aren't you? Walter Krauss?" The operator neither confirmed nor denied, but Eleanor nodded as if he'd spoken. "I knew Walter," she said quietly. "Not well, but enough. He came to parties sometimes,
back when he could afford to. Quiet man, watchful. The kind who noticed things others missed. What kind of things? The kind that matter when millions of dollars are moving through unofficial channels. She adjusted her gloves, a nervous gesture he'd never seen from her before. Be careful. Some ghosts are better left undisturbed. After she left, the operator continued his preparations. He'd convinced Tommy to come in early as well, bribing him with coffee and donuts from Kelman's bakery. The boy arrived at 6:30, still rubbing sleep from his eyes. "What are we doing exactly?" Tommy asked, powering up his press under the operator's direction. "Testing a theory. Run your press at different speeds while I monitor the linotype. Start at 800 impressions per hour." Tommy complied, and the press rumbled to life, its rhythm slow and steady. The operator placed his hand on number 7's frame, feeling for vibrations. Minimal at this speed, barely perceptible. Now 900. The frequency increased.
The operator watched the matrices in the magazine, noting a slight tremor in channels 4 and 5. 1,000. More pronounced vibrations now. Several matrices shifted forward slightly, but randomly, no pattern. 1,140. The change was immediate and dramatic. The matrices began their strange dance, sliding forward in their channels with deliberate precision. First the W, then A, then L, each letter moving as if pulled by invisible fingers. Within 90 seconds, Walter Krauss had aligned at the release point. "Holy Mother," Tommy breathed, watching from behind. "It's really doing it." The operator documented everything, noting the exact frequency, the time required, the sequence of letter movement. It was reproducible, predictable, a mechanical accident that bordered on the miraculous. Sam Harrigan arrived as they were conducting their 5th test, drawn by the sound of the press running at an unusual hour. He watched in fascination as the matrices aligned themselves once again. "That's the damnedest thing I've ever seen." "It's mathematics," the operator explained. "The press at that exact speed creates a standing wave at 42 feet. The wave frequency matches the resonance of the brass matrices for these specific letters. They're lighter or heavier than others, shaped differently. The vibration moves them forward while leaving others behind." "But why those letters? Why his name?" That was the question that transformed coincidence into mystery. The operator had been pondering it all night. The matrices wear differently depending on use. Common letters like E and A get used more, become slightly lighter from wear. The specific combination of worn matrices in this machine at this moment in time happens to correspond to the letters in Walter Krauss's name. Sam pulled out his notebook. "So, you're saying the machine evolved to spell his name?" "I'm saying 20 years of use created the exact conditions necessary for this to happen. Change one variable, the distance between machines, the wear on the matrices, the frequency of the press, and it doesn't work." They were interrupted by Frank DiMaggio's voice booming across the floor. "What the hell is this, a science experiment? We've got a newspaper to print." But his anger seemed forced, distracted. As the morning shift arrived and the floor filled with its usual activity, the operator noticed Frank watching them, his expression troubled. The man in the suit from earlier stood near the elevator, observing the printing floor with obvious distaste. The operator returned to his regular work, setting type for the classified advertisements. Lost dogs, used furniture, rooms for rent. The mundane notices of everyday life, each one representing someone's small crisis or hope.
But his mind kept returning to the equation of coincidence that had created this mechanical message. During lunch, he walked to the Boston Public Library, 3 blocks from the Herald. In the reading room, surrounded by the quiet rustle of turning pages, he searched through back issues of the newspaper from 1938. November 15th, the day Walter Krauss disappeared, had been unseasonably warm, Indian summer's last gasp. The paper that day had carried news of escalating tensions in Europe, Roosevelt's New Deal programs, and on page 7, below the fold, a brief notice: local accountant missing. He found the follow-up stories Sam had written: searches of the harbor, speculation about amnesia or voluntary disappearance, interviews with colleagues who described Walter as dedicated and meticulous. Then, nothing. The story died as stories do when there's no body, no crime, no resolution. Returning to the Herald, he found the printing floor in an uproar.
One of the stereotypers had burned himself badly with molten lead, and the smell of charred flesh mixed with the usual industrial odors. Accidents happened regularly. Printing was dangerous work, but the timing felt ominous, coming so soon after the morning's experiments. Margaret Krauss stood near the entrance, holding her bundle of mended clothes, frozen by the chaos. The operator saw her lips moving, prayer perhaps, or simple shock at the violence inherent in this place where her husband's name had mysteriously appeared. "Mrs. Krauss," he said gently, "perhaps you should come back tomorrow." She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much sorrow. "Do you know about the letters? The ones that appeared?" Word had spread beyond the printing floor then. "I operate the machine that produced them." "They say it's a sign that Walter is trying to tell us something." The operator thought about explaining the mechanics of it, the frequencies and resonances and coincidences.
But looking at her worn face, the hope and fear warring in her expression, he said simply, "Perhaps he is." That afternoon, as he set type for the financial pages, he noticed something new. The mysterious alignment of matrices only occurred when Tommy's press ran at 1140 impressions while printing financial supplements. The paper stock for those supplements was slightly heavier, requiring that specific speed, and the financial supplements only ran on Tuesdays and Fridays, the same days Walter Krauss had worked late at Thornton Industries 7 years ago. Layer upon layer of coincidence, building into something that felt like intention. The operator understood that meaning was something humans imposed on random events, that pattern recognition was an evolutionary survival trait that often saw design where none existed. But understanding this didn't diminish the chill he felt as the connections multiplied. Near closing time, Sam approached with news. "I've been talking to sources at City Hall. There's going to be an audit of the Sumner Tunnel construction costs. First comprehensive review since it opened in '34. After 11 years, why now? Federal government's requiring it for some new transportation funding. But here's the interesting part. Joseph Thornton is fighting it tooth and nail. Says it's unnecessary expense, claims all the records were properly reviewed at the time." The operator thought about Walter Krauss, an accountant who specialized in municipal bonds and city contracts, who'd requested shipping manifests shortly before disappearing.
about matrices aligning to spell his name whenever financial documents were printed, about messages demanding delivery, whether through supernatural intervention or mechanical accident. "Sam," he said quietly,
"I think Walter Krauss is trying to tell us where to look." Wednesday morning descended on Boston with the kind of bitter wind that made October feel like November's harsh rehearsal. The operator found Sam Harrigan waiting for him at the employee's entrance, collar turned up against the cold, a cardboard box tucked under his arm. "I've been up all night," Sam announced without preamble. His eyes had that fevered brightness of a reporter who'd caught the scent of something rotten. "Going through every piece of paper I could find about Walter Krauss." They walked together through the empty hallways, their footsteps echoing off the institutional green walls. The building felt different in these pre-dawn hours, heavy with accumulated stories, decades of newsprint and ink and human ambition pressed into its bones. "What did you find?" the operator asked as they reached the printing floor. Sam set the box on a nearby table, pulling out folders stuffed with yellowed newspaper clippings, carbon copies of police reports, handwritten notes. Walter wasn't just any accountant. Before Thornton Industries, he worked for the state comptroller's office, specialized in infrastructure spending, bridges, tunnels, public works. The kind of projects where $1 million can disappear into a contractor's pocket and nobody notices. The operator began his morning inspection of number 7 while Sam talked. The machine sat silent, betraying nothing of its strange capability. He ran his fingers along the magazine channels, feeling for any changes in the matrices' alignment. In 1937, Sam continued, Walter was assigned to review the Sumner Tunnel project. Routine audit, nothing special. But then Thornton Industries hired him away. Double his state salary, office with a window, secretary who could actually type. The American dream, right? But something went wrong. That's the understated way of putting it. According to his former colleagues, the ones still willing to talk, Walter became increasingly agitated in the months before his disappearance. Started keeping duplicate records, staying late, asking questions about shipping manifests from 2 years prior. Frank DiMaggio arrived earlier than usual, his expression grim. He barely nodded at them before disappearing into his office. Through the window they could see him on the telephone, gesturing emphatically, though the person on the other end couldn't see him. Tommy Sullivan appeared next, looking nervous. "Did you hear? Management's sending someone down to inspect all the linotypes. They want to find the mechanical issue causing the disturbances." The operator felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the sensation of authority bearing down, looking for someone to blame. In 20 years, he'd learned that when things went wrong, management always looked downward for culprits, never up. "When?" he asked. "This afternoon. Mr. Thornton himself might come." Sam and the operator exchanged glances. Joseph Thornton hadn't set foot on the printing floor in the 5 years since he'd bought his stake in the Herald. The fact that he'd take interest now, when Walter Krauss's name had mysteriously appeared, suggested connections that ran deeper than mechanical coincidence. Eleanor Blackwood arrived at her unusually early hour, but today she wasn't alone. A younger woman accompanied her, fashionably dressed, but with the uncertain air of someone unaccustomed to the Herald building's industrial lower reaches. "Gentlemen," Eleanor said, approaching them with deliberate casualness that immediately put the operator on alert. "This is Miss Catherine Thornton, Mr. Thornton's daughter. She's writing a piece on the working conditions in Boston's industries." "I thought she might start with our printing floor." Catherine Thornton had her father's sharp features, but softened by youth and what appeared to be genuine curiosity rather than calculation. She extended her hand to the operator, surprising him. Most society women wouldn't dream of shaking hands with a laborer.
"Eleanor tells me you're the best linotype operator in Boston," she said. "I'd love to understand how these machines work." The operator found himself explaining the basics: the keyboard, the matrices, the hot metal casting process, while being acutely aware of Eleanor watching them both with an expression he couldn't quite read. Catherine asked intelligent questions, seemed genuinely interested in the answers. "It must require incredible precision," she observed. "One wrong letter could change the entire meaning of a sentence, or reveal a truth someone wanted hidden," Sam interjected, earning a sharp look from Eleanor. Catherine turned to him with interest.
You're the crime reporter, aren't you, Mr. Harrigan? I've read your pieces on the Murphy trial. Very thorough work." As they talked, the operator noticed something about Catherine's hands. Ink stains on her fingers, the kind you got from handling carbon paper. Not the manicured hands of a society dilettante playing at journalism, but working hands. She'd been doing her own research. The morning shift arrived in full force, the printing floor coming alive with its familiar symphony of mechanical noise. The operator returned to his work, setting type for the day's edition, while remaining aware of Catherine Thornton moving through the floor, asking questions, making notes. Around 10 o'clock, she approached number 7. "This is the machine, isn't it? The one that produced the mysterious name?" Before he could respond, the building's power flickered, unusual, as the electrical systems were typically reliable. In that brief moment of dimness, the operator saw something strange. Condensation on the linotype's metal surface, spelling out letters that vanished as quickly as they appeared. But Catherine saw it too, her sharp intake of breath confirming he hadn't imagined it. "My father says it's all nonsense," she said quietly. "Mechanical malfunction, nothing more. But you don't believe that, do you?" "I believe in evidence," the operator replied carefully. "Mechanical or otherwise." She studied him for a long moment. "Walter Krauss was a good man. He had dinner at our house once when I was 15. I remember him because he was the only one of Father's business associates who actually spoke to me like I was a person, not furniture. He asked about my studies, my plans for the future." "That was 7 years ago." 7 years, 3 months, and 12 days. The last time anyone saw him alive." She paused, seeming to weigh her next words. "I've been doing my own investigation, Mr. "I'm sorry, I don't know your name." "Nobody does," he said with a slight smile. "On the floor, I'm just the operator of number 7. "Well, Mr. Number 7, I think my father is very afraid of what your machine might reveal. And when Joseph Thornton is afraid, people should pay attention." She moved away before he could respond, rejoining Eleanor, who guided her toward the elevator with the protective air of a shepherd moving a lamb away from wolves. But as the elevator doors closed, Catherine looked back at him with an expression that suggested their conversation wasn't finished. Sam had been watching the entire exchange. That young woman knows something, or suspects something. There's a difference. Not in my experience. Suspicion is just knowledge waiting for proof. The afternoon brought the promised inspection. 3 men in expensive suits descended to the printing floor, accompanied by Frank DiMaggio, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. They examined each linotype in turn, making notes on clipboards, asking questions that revealed they knew nothing about the actual operation of the machines. When they reached number 7, the lead inspector, a thin man with the pallor of someone who spent his life in offices, directed the operator to demonstrate the machine's full operation. He complied, fingers dancing across the keyboard, producing line after line of perfect type. The machine behaved flawlessly, giving no hint of its strange capability. "There appears to be nothing wrong with this equipment," the inspector pronounced. "Whatever incidents have been reported were clearly operator error or hysteria." The operator said nothing, but Sam spoke up from where he'd been observing. "Hysteria? Multiple witnesses saw the same phenomenon. That's not hysteria. That's evidence." "You're a reporter, Mr. Harrigan, not an engineer. Leave mechanical assessments to those qualified to make them." After they left, Frank approached the operator. "They want me to reassign you. Say you're stirring up trouble, making the other workers nervous. Are you going to?" Frank chewed his cigar thoughtfully. "Been thinking about my old man. Worked these floors for 40 years, back when they still set type by hand. He used to say machines have memories, that they absorb something from everyone who operates them. Thought he was going senile at the time, but now," he shrugged, "you keep doing what you're doing. I'll handle management." That evening, as the operator cleaned number 7, he found something wedged beneath the spacebar mechanism, a small piece of folded paper yellowed with age. He carefully extracted it, unfolding it to reveal numbers written in pencil: 11, 15, 38, WT 431. A date: November 15th, 1938, the day Walter Krauss disappeared. His initials, and another number, 431.
Room number? Page number? Dollar amount? He pocketed the paper, mind racing. How long had it been there? Who had placed it? The machine had been thoroughly cleaned and serviced dozens of times in 7 years. Yet this paper had remained hidden, waiting. As he left the building, he passed Margaret Krauss, coming in with her evening delivery of mended clothes. Their eyes met, and she stopped. "They say you found something," she said, "about Walter." He thought about the paper in his pocket, the numbers that might mean nothing or everything. "The machine found it," he corrected gently. "I'm just trying to understand what it means." Thursday brought fog so thick it turned the Herald building into an island, isolated from the rest of Boston by walls of gray. The operator arrived to find Sam Harrigan already there, surrounded by ledgers and financial documents spread across a commandeered desk near the morgue entrance. 431, Sam said without looking up. "I've been thinking about those numbers all night. Not a room. I checked every building connected to Thornton or Krauss. Not a page number in any report I can find. But look at this." He showed the operator a shipping manifest from October 1937. "Purchase order 431. Thornton Industries buying steel beam supports for the Sumner Tunnel project. Except," he pulled out another document, "the same purchase order appears again 3 weeks later. Different vendor, different price. 30% cheaper. They double ordered, or they ordered once on paper and once in reality. Bill the city for Pennsylvania steel at premium prices, actually use inferior product from a subsidiary company nobody's heard of, pocket the difference." The operator studied the documents. The amounts were staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars in a single transaction. Multiply that across a project the size of the tunnel, and you had millions. Enough to kill for, certainly. Tommy Sullivan interrupted them, his young face troubled. "There's a lady here asking for you," he told the operator. "Says it's urgent." Catherine Thornton waited near the elevator, dressed in a simple wool coat that made her look more like a secretary than an heiress. She carried a leather satchel,
held tight against her body as if it contained something precious or dangerous. "I need to show you something," she said quietly, "but not here. Too many eyes." They walked to McGinty's tavern, empty at this early hour, except for a few night shift workers nursing their first drinks of the morning. Catherine chose a booth in the back corner, away from the windows. "My father keeps records," she began, pulling papers from her satchel. "Not the official ones. Those are all perfectly legal, properly audited. But private records, in his study at home."
"I've been photographing them." The operator examined the photographs. Ledger pages in Thornton's own handwriting, documenting payments to city inspectors, bribes listed as consulting fees, and most damning, a payment of $10,000 dated November 14, 1938. Next to it, a single notation, K, problem resolved. "The day before Walter disappeared," Catherine said unnecessarily. "I remember that day because Father came home very late, smelling of smoke and whiskey. He burned something in the fireplace, papers, lots of them. Mother asked what he was doing, and he said he was cleaning out old business documents. 'Why are you showing me this?' She met his eyes directly. 'Because Walter Krauss was kind to me when no one else bothered. Because I've watched my father destroy people who got in his way. Because I'm tired of pretending I don't know what paid for my education, my clothes, my comfortable life. This is dangerous.' If your father finds out, he won't. He thinks I'm playing at journalism, writing puff pieces about society parties. He doesn't know I studied accounting at Radcliffe, that I understand exactly what his records mean." Back at the Herald, the operator found the printing floor in unusual chaos. One of the massive rolls of newsprint had fallen from its mount, narrowly missing 2 workers. Frank DiMaggio was shouting at everyone in sight while trying to coordinate the cleanup. "Damn chain snapped," he explained to the operator. "Clean break, like someone cut it halfway through. We're lucky nobody was killed." The operator examined the broken chain. Frank was right. The break was too clean for metal fatigue. Someone had deliberately weakened it. A warning, perhaps, or an attempt to create a distraction. Eleanor Blackwood appeared at his elbow. "Accidents happen," she said meaningfully. "Especially when people ask too many questions about the wrong subjects." "Is that a threat, Eleanor?" "It's an observation. I've survived in this business for 20 years by knowing when to pursue a story and when to let it go. Walter Krauss is dead. Nothing we do will bring him back." "But his killer is still alive, still profiting from his crime." Eleanor's composure cracked slightly. "You don't know that. You have theories, coincidences, a machine that acts strangely. That's not proof." "Then why is everyone so afraid?" She didn't answer, but her silence spoke volumes. The operator returned to number 7, setting type for the afternoon edition. As he worked, he noticed Margaret Krauss near the delivery entrance, speaking with Sam Harrigan. She was crying, shoulders shaking, while Sam took notes. Whatever she was telling him, it was clearly painful to recount. At lunch, Sam found the operator in the break room. "Margaret just told me something interesting. The night Walter disappeared, he called her from his office, told her he'd found proof of something terrible, that he was bringing evidence home. But he never arrived. The police must have investigated." "They did. Found his office cleaned out, no sign of any evidence. His car was found abandoned by the harbor a week later. The police concluded he'd jumped, body washed out to sea." The operator thought about the notation in Thornton's private ledger, K, problem resolved. Such a clinical way to describe a murder.
That afternoon, while setting type for the financial pages, the operator paid special attention to the Thornton Industries quarterly report. Profits up 12%, new government contracts secured, expansion planned. The company that had built its fortune on corruption was thriving. Around 3 o'clock, the vibrations started again. Tommy's press running at that specific frequency, the matrices in number 7 beginning their strange dance.
But this time, they spelled something different. Basement 431. The operator stared at the aligned matrices. The machine had never produced anything but Walter's name before. This was new, deliberate, impossible to explain through pure mechanical resonance. "You seeing this?" Tommy called out, having noticed the operator's stillness. "Keep the press running," the operator replied, documenting the new message. "Don't change the speed." The matrices held their position for exactly 90 seconds, then scattered back into their channels as the press frequency shifted slightly. But the message was clear. 431 wasn't a purchase order, it was a location. After his shift, the operator descended into the Herald Building's basement. It was a maze of storage rooms, old printing equipment, and decades of accumulated newspaper detritus. Room numbers had been painted on doors decades ago, most now illegible from age and moisture. He found room 431 in the oldest section, behind boilers that hadn't been used since the building converted from coal to oil heating. The door was locked, but the wood around the lock had rotted. A firm push, and it gave way. Inside, covered in dust and mouse droppings, were boxes of financial records from the late 30s. Not Herald records. These bore the Thornton Industries letterhead. Why were they here? Who had hidden them? Opening the first box, he found his answer. These were Walter Krause's duplicate records, the evidence he'd mentioned to his wife. Detailed documentation of the tunnel construction fraud, names, dates, amounts, and at the bottom, a handwritten note. "If something happens to me, these records prove everything. Joseph Thornton ordered inferior steel for the tunnel support beams. When inspectors are finally honest enough to check, they'll find rust, weakness, potential catastrophic failure. The blood of everyone who dies will be on his hands." W.K. The operator sat back on his heels, surrounded by evidence of a 7-year-old murder and an ongoing crime that put thousands of daily tunnel commuters at risk. The machine hadn't just been randomly producing Walter's name. It had been trying to lead them here, to this room, to this truth. But how had Walter hidden these records here? The Herald Building wasn't connected to Thornton Industries, unless... He thought about the dates. November 14th, Walter calls his wife, says he's bringing evidence home. November 15th, he disappears. Sometime in between, he'd come here to the Herald, probably hoping to give the records to a reporter. But something had stopped him, or someone. The operator gathered several key documents, sliding them inside his coat. The rest would have to stay for now, too much to carry without being noticed. As he made his way back through the basement, he heard footsteps on the stairs. He pressed himself against the wall, holding his breath. Frank DiMaggio's voice echoed in the corridor. "I told you, there's nothing down here but old junk. Mr. Thornton insists on a thorough search," another voice replied. "He's concerned about fire hazards." They were coming this way. The operator moved quickly but quietly, using his knowledge of the building to circle back to another stairway. He emerged on the printing floor just as the evening shift was arriving, blending into the crowd of workers.
Friday morning's rain hammered against the Herald building's windows with unusual violence, as if the weather itself had turned investigative, trying to wash away 7 years of accumulated lies. The operator arrived to find Sam Harrigan and Margaret Krause in Frank DiMaggio's office, their voices carrying despite the closed door. "I need to know everything," Sam was saying. "Every detail from that last day." Margaret sat very straight in the wooden chair, hands folded in her lap, maintaining the dignity that seemed to be all she had left.
The operator paused outside, pretending to check the schedule board while listening. "Walter called me at 6:15, Margaret said, her voice steady but thin, like wire stretched too tight. He sounded triumphant, said he'd finally found the proof he needed, that people were going to prison. I told him to come home, we'd talk about it, but he said he had one more stop to make first." "Where?" "The Herald building. He wanted to give copies to a reporter he trusted, someone named Patterson." The operator felt a chill. Bill Patterson had been the Herald's lead investigative reporter in '38. He'd died in a car accident 3 weeks after Walter's disappearance. The brakes had failed on a clear day, sending him into the Charles River. Sam must have made the same connection. Patterson died that November. "I know," Margaret said quietly. "When I heard about his accident, I knew Walter hadn't killed himself."
Someone was cleaning up loose ends. The operator entered the office, causing the conversation to pause. Frank looked relieved at the interruption. "We're going to need number 7 running early today. Financial supplements, plus a special edition on the tunnel renovation project." The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The very tunnel Walter had died investigating was now news again. "Mrs. Krause," the operator said carefully, "the night your husband disappeared, did he mention any numbers, specifically 431? Her eyes widened slightly. "How did you—" "Yes. He said he'd left insurance at 431, that if anything happened, I should tell someone trustworthy about 431. But I never knew what it meant. The police said I was imagining things, that grief makes people hear what they want to hear." Sam and the operator exchanged glances.
The machine hadn't just been spelling Walter's name randomly. It had been trying to deliver his final message, the one the police had ignored or suppressed. On the printing floor, Tommy Sullivan was agitated, pacing near his press. "They came to my apartment last night," he said when he saw the operator. "2 men in suits, asking about the disturbances here. Wanted to know what I'd seen, what you'd told me. I didn't say nothing, but they knew things. Knew about our tests with the frequencies. Someone had been watching them more closely than they'd realized." The operator began his inspection of number 7 with extra care, checking for any signs of tampering. The machine appeared normal, but he noticed something new. A faint pattern of scratches on the frame near the keyboard, as if someone had etched something and then tried to file it away. He traced the scratches with his finger, feeling the depressions. Letters, barely visible. WK. Was here, 11/14/38. Walter had been at this machine the night he disappeared. Had he operated it? Hidden something in it? The operator began a more thorough examination, removing panels he'd never had reason to open before. Eleanor Blackwood arrived at her usual time, but she looked haggard, older somehow. She approached the operator directly, abandoning her usual pretense of indifference to the printing floor workers. "Joseph Thornton knows about his daughter's visits here," she said quietly. "He's furious. She's been confined to the house, forbidden from any contact with the newspaper. How do you— I know everything that matters in this city, remember?
But some knowledge comes with a price. She paused, seeming to wrestle with something. In 1938, I was younger, ambitious, willing to overlook certain things for the sake of access. Thornton fed me society gossip. I didn't ask about his business dealings. But I knew Walter Krauss. His wife sang in my church choir.
When he disappeared, you suspected. I knew, but I said nothing, wrote nothing. I've been living with that silence for 7 years. Before the operator could respond, a commotion erupted near the main entrance. Joseph Thornton himself strode onto the printing floor, flanked by 2 large men who looked less like businessmen and more like dock workers stuffed into suits. Workers stopped what they were doing, watching the unprecedented visit from ownership. Thornton walked directly to number 7. He was 62 but carried himself like a younger man, with the controlled energy of someone used to being obeyed. His eyes were the pale blue of winter ice, and they fixed on the operator with undisguised hostility. "This machine is being decommissioned," he announced. "Effective immediately." Frank DiMaggio emerged from his office. "Mr. Thornton, we need that linotype for today's production, then use another one. This machine is defective, potentially dangerous. I won't have worker safety compromised." The hypocrisy of Joseph Thornton expressing concern for worker safety when he'd used substandard materials in a tunnel thousands traveled through daily was breathtaking. But the operator kept his expression neutral. "With respect, Mr. Thornton," he said, "I've operated this machine for 12 years. I know every sound it makes, every vibration. It's not dangerous. Are you questioning my judgment?" "I'm stating my professional opinion." Thornton's face flushed. "Your professional opinion is no longer required. You're terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out." The printing floor went silent. Getting fired from the Herald usually meant being blacklisted from every newspaper in Boston. It was a career death sentence. Sam Harrigan stepped forward. "You can't fire a man for doing his job. I can fire anyone I please. I own 40% of this paper." "And I own the story of the century," Sam replied. Corruption in the Sumner Tunnel construction. Bribes, substandard materials, murder. Fire him, and it runs in tomorrow's edition. You have no proof. I have Walter Krauss's duplicate records, hidden in this building for 7 years, waiting for someone to find them. The operator watched Thornton's face cycle through emotions: surprise, fear, calculation. The man hadn't known about the records in the basement, which meant Walter had hidden them without anyone's knowledge, probably in the brief window between calling his wife and being murdered. "Those records were stolen," Thornton said finally. "Inadmissible, worthless." "In court, maybe," Sam agreed, "but not in the court of public opinion, especially when combined with your private ledgers documenting a payment for resolving the K problem." Now Thornton went truly pale. He looked around the printing floor, seeing dozens of witnesses to this confrontation. "My office," he said tersely. "We'll discuss this privately." "No," Margaret Krauss said, stepping forward. Everyone had forgotten she was there, standing near Frank's office. 7 years I've waited for the truth. You killed my husband because he threatened your fortune. At least have the courage to admit it where these men can hear." "I admit nothing. Your husband was unstable, depressed. He killed himself." "Then why did you pay $10,000 to have the problem resolved? Why did Bill Patterson die 3 weeks later? Why are you so afraid of an old printing machine?" The matrices in number 7 began to move. Nobody was operating the keyboard. Tommy's press wasn't running. There was no vibration, no mechanical explanation.
but the brass letters were sliding forward in their channels, aligning themselves. Murderer. Several workers crossed themselves. Tommy whispered a prayer.
Even the operator, who understood machinery down to its smallest components, felt his rational mind rebel against what he was seeing. Thornton backed away from the machine. That's impossible. The matrices scattered and reformed. Justice. Stop it, Thornton shouted. Whatever trick this is, stop it. But the machine continued its impossible message. The truth will bury you. Thornton's composure shattered completely. I had no choice. Krauss was going to destroy everything. The tunnel project employed thousands during the Depression. One man's life against all those jobs, those families eating because of my contracts. And the inferior steel? Sam pressed, his notebook already out. The steel that's been rusting for 7 years? It was supposed to be temporary. We were going to replace it once the economy improved, once we had the money. But then the war came, and materials were scarce, and you hoped everyone would forget, Margaret finished.
Like they forgot my husband. The printing floor remained frozen in tableau. Thornton backed against a steel column. Margaret standing with quiet dignity. Sam scribbling notes with fevered intensity. And the operator watching number 7's matrices slowly return to their channels, as if the machine itself had exhaled after delivering its message. Frank DiMaggio broke the spell. Everyone back to work. We've got a paper to print. His voice carried the authority of 30 years' experience. And slowly, reluctantly, the workers returned to their stations, though their eyes kept drifting back to the confrontation. Thornton had recovered some of his composure, though sweat beaded on his forehead despite the floor's morning chill. Nothing I said constitutes admission of anything. You have no witnesses to any crime. I have your private ledgers, Sam countered, stolen by my ungrateful daughter. It admissible and easily explained as misconstrued business notations. Eleanor Blackwood stepped forward from where she'd been observing. I was at the Harborside Club the night Walter disappeared. You were there too, Joseph, remember? You arrived at 8:30, your shoes muddy despite the doorman's best efforts with his brush. Odd, since you'd supposedly come straight from your office downtown. But the harbor mud has a particular smell, doesn't it? Especially near Pier 47, where Walter's car was found. Thornton's jaw tightened. Speculation and coincidence. Perhaps. But I wonder what other coincidences might emerge if someone were to write a detailed society column about that night. Who else was there? Who left when? Who seemed nervous? My memory for such details is quite remarkable. The operator understood what was happening. The accumulated weight of evidence, testimony, and witness accounts creating pressure Thornton couldn't escape. Like his own linotype, where individual letters meant nothing until assembled into words, sentences, truth. A new voice interrupted from the elevator. Father? Catherine Thornton stood there, having somehow escaped her house confinement. Behind her were 2 uniformed police officers and a man in a federal inspector's badge. Miss Thornton came to us this morning, the federal inspector said, with documents suggesting serious irregularities in the Sumner Tunnel construction. Given the interstate commerce implications, this falls under federal jurisdiction. Thornton looked at his daughter with an expression of complete betrayal. You don't know what you've done. I know exactly what I've done, Catherine replied steadily. "What I should have done 7 years ago when I was old enough to understand, but young enough to be a coward." The federal inspector approached Thornton. "Sir, we'll need you to come with us. You're not under arrest at this time, but we have questions requiring immediate answers." "I need my lawyer." "You're free to contact counsel. But first, we need to secure certain records from your offices and homes. Miss Thornton has been very helpful in identifying relevant locations." As they moved toward the elevator, Thornton stopped beside the operator. "You think you've won something here? You've destroyed jobs, reputations, families. That tunnel will need complete reconstruction now. The city will go bankrupt. Thousands will suffer because you couldn't leave the past buried." The operator met his gaze calmly. "They'll suffer more if the tunnel collapses during rush hour." After Thornton was escorted out, the printing floor erupted in conversation. Workers who'd held their tongues for years suddenly had opinions about management, about Thornton, about the strange events they'd witnessed.
Tommy Sullivan was practically vibrating with excitement, already embellishing the story for maximum dramatic effect. Sam approached Margaret Krause, who'd sunk into a chair, overwhelmed by the morning's revelations. "Mrs. Krause, I know this is difficult, but I need to write this story. All of it. Your husband deserves that." She nodded, tears finally coming after 7 years of rigid control. "He was a good man. He just wanted to do the right thing." The operator returned to number 7, running his hands over its familiar surfaces. The machine had done something impossible today. Something he couldn't explain through physics or mechanics, yet it felt right somehow. As if 20 years of his labor, of feeding truth through its mechanisms one letter at a time, had given it the ability to speak truth on its own. Frank DiMaggio appeared at his shoulder. "You're not fired, obviously. Thornton won't own anything once the feds are done with him. But I need to know, can you operate this machine after what happened?" The operator considered. The rational part of his mind still insisted there must be an explanation. Electromagnetic fields, temperature variations, something. But another part, older and wiser, accepted that some truths existed beyond measurement. "I've got financial pages to set," he said simply, taking his position at the keyboard. The rest of the morning passed in strange normalcy. The operator set type for stock prices and commodity reports, his fingers moving automatically while his mind processed the morning's events. Around him, the Herald building continued its daily transformation of events into news. But everyone seemed aware they'd witnessed something extraordinary. Eleanor Blackwood stopped by before heading to her office. "I'll be writing about this, you know. The biggest society scandal in Boston history. But I won't mention the machine's unusual behavior." Some things shouldn't be reduced to newsprint. Protecting your reputation for rationality, protecting something more valuable, the possibility of mystery in an increasingly mechanical world. At lunch, Catherine Thornton returned, accompanied by federal agents carrying boxes of seized documents. She looked exhausted but determined, her father's steel showing in her spine, if not her conscience. They found more than just tunnel records, she told Sam and the operator. Father was involved in dozens of schemes: construction fraud, bribery, tax evasion. The tunnel was just the beginning. "What will you do now?" the operator asked. "Try to make amends. The family fortune is built on blood and lies. Maybe I can use what's left to help the people Father hurt." She paused, looking at number 7. Is it true what they're saying? That the machine spelled out messages on its own? You saw the condensation that morning, the operator reminded her. I saw letters that could have been coincidence, pareidolia, my guilty conscience, but this morning, they say it spelled murderer without anyone touching it. The operator considered his response. Your father seemed to believe it. My father also believes poor people deserve their poverty and that laws are for lesser men. His beliefs aren't always reliable guides to truth. As the afternoon wore on, news of Thornton's detention spread through Boston's business community. The Herald's phones rang constantly, other papers wanting statements, businessmen worried about their own dealings with Thornton Industries, city officials scrambling to understand the tunnel situation's implications. Sam wrote furiously, crafting the story that would run in tomorrow's edition. He showed the operator his lead. 7 years after his disappearance, murdered accountant Walter Krause has finally delivered his evidence against one of Boston's most powerful men, thanks to the persistence of truth and the conscience of an heir unwilling to inherit blood money. No mention of the machine? I'm a crime reporter, not a fantasist, though I might write a novel about it someday, when I retire. Near closing time, as the evening shift prepared the night edition, the operator made one final inspection of number 7. In the fading light from the high windows, he noticed something he'd missed before. Tiny scratches on the space bar, almost invisible unless the light hit just right. Letters, carefully etched. Thank you, W.K. They could have been there for years, of course. Could have been carved by Walter that night in 1938, hoping someone would eventually find them. Or they could have appeared today, one final, impossible message from whatever presence had animated the machine. The operator chose not to look too closely, not to analyze the depth of the scratches or the oxidation of the exposed metal. Some mysteries deserved preservation. As he prepared to leave, Margaret Krause appeared one last time. I wanted to thank you, she said simply, for listening to what the machine was trying to say. It was just frequencies and vibrations, Mrs. Krause. Mechanical coincidence. She smiled, the first time he'd seen her do so. If you say so, but I'll sleep better tonight than I have in 7 years, knowing Walter's message finally got delivered. Walking home through the October evening, the operator reflected on the day's events. Tomorrow, Boston would wake to headlines about corruption and murder. The tunnel would be inspected, probably condemned. Thornton would hire expensive lawyers, though the evidence seemed overwhelming. Catherine would try to atone for her father's sins. Margaret would begin the long process of genuine mourning, now that she had answers. And number 7 would continue its work, setting type for stories both mundane and extraordinary, its mechanisms carrying the weight of truth one letter at a time. Whether it had truly channeled Walter Krause's spirit or simply demonstrated the magnificent improbability of mechanical coincidence, it had served justice. The operator paused at the corner of Washington and Summer Streets, looking back at the Herald building. In the lit windows of the printing floor, he could see the silhouettes of workers at their machines, the night shift beginning their dance with lead and ink. Saturday morning's edition sold out within 2 hours. Boston woke to Sam Harrigan's front-page exposé, Tunnel of Corruption, Thornton Industries built fortune on fraud and murder. The operator arrived at the Herald building to find crowds gathered outside.
reporters from rival papers trying to get statements, and police maintaining order at the entrances. Frank DiMaggio stood inside the employees' entrance, chomping on an unlit cigar. His wife had finally won that battle. "Going to be a hell of a day," he said to the operator. "We're running a second edition, maybe a third. Every linotype running full capacity." The printing floor hummed with unusual energy for a Saturday. Workers who normally had the day off had come in, drawn by the historic nature of the story and the overtime pay. The operator found number 7 already warmed up, someone having prepared it for the day's heavy load. Tommy Sullivan practically bounced with excitement. "My girl's father read the paper this morning,"
said any man who worked on exposing such corruption was worthy of respect. "He's invited me to Sunday dinner." The operator smiled at the boy's joy, remembering his own youth when approval from a girl's family seemed the most important thing in the world. Strange how great events rippled down to change individual lives in unexpected ways. Eleanor Blackwood descended from the editorial floors, looking satisfied in a way the operator had never seen before. "My column on the Thornton family's social manipulation has generated more response than anything I've written in 20 years. Sometimes the public hungers for truth more than gossip." "Will you write about Walter's wife? How she survived these 7 years?" Eleanor's expression softened. "Margaret Krause deserves her privacy now. She's endured enough public scrutiny. Though I understand several charitable organizations are already organizing support for her." Sam appeared, looking haggard but triumphant.
"The feds have been at Thornton's offices all night. They've found evidence of at least a dozen other fraudulent contracts. The mayor's calling for a complete audit of all city construction from the past decade." The morning passed in controlled chaos, the operator's fingers flying across number 7's keyboard as he set column after column of follow-up stories, reactions, and related investigations. The machine performed flawlessly, as if exhausted from its supernatural efforts and content to return to mere mechanical perfection. Around noon, unexpected visitors arrived. 3 men in expensive suits, but not the threatening kind Thornton had employed. These were lawyers representing the Herald's other shareholders. "Mr. DiMaggio," one addressed Frank, though loud enough for everyone to hear. "In light of recent events, the board has voted to liquidate Joseph Thornton's shares and redistribute ownership among the staff. A profit-sharing arrangement, effective immediately." The printing floor went silent, then erupted in cheers. Workers who'd labored for decades without hope of anything beyond wages would now own pieces of the paper they produced. The operator saw tears in some of the older men's eyes, but the celebration was interrupted by urgent shouts from the street. Through the high windows, they could see police cars racing past, all heading in the same direction. Sam grabbed the phone on Frank's desk, calling his contact at police headquarters. His face went white as he listened. "There's been a collapse in the Sumner Tunnel. Not complete, but a section of the ceiling. Cars are trapped." The printing floor went silent again, but this time with horror. They'd exposed the corruption, but too late to prevent disaster. The operator thought of the thousands who traveled through that tunnel daily, trusting in its solidity. "How many casualties?" Frank asked quietly. "They don't know yet." "Rescue teams are going in now." The operator returned to number 7, knowing they'd need to reset the entire afternoon edition. This was bigger than corruption now. It was about lives lost to greed, about the real cost of Thornton's schemes. As he began clearing the galleys, he noticed something odd. The machine's temperature gauge showed it running cooler than normal, despite heavy use all morning. He placed his hand on the frame and felt it. not cold exactly, but calm, as if the machine, having delivered its warning, could offer some comfort. Fanciful thinking, he knew, but in that moment of potential tragedy, even rational men grasped for meaning. Catherine Thornton arrived, accompanied by the federal inspector. Her face was drawn, aged years in the past day. The collapse. Is it because of what we revealed? The corruption was already there, the inspector told her firmly. The steel was already rusted, the supports already weakened. If anything, your revelation prevented a worse disaster. The tunnel was closed to traffic within minutes of our initial inspection this morning. The only people inside were a maintenance crew checking the areas we'd identified as compromised. How many? 6 men. 2 are already out, injured but alive. Rescue teams are working to reach the others. The operator thought about those maintenance men, working-class people like himself, risking their lives to verify what Walter Krauss had died trying to reveal. The machine couldn't save everyone, couldn't prevent all consequences of past crimes, but perhaps it had minimized the tragedy. The afternoon became a blur of updated editions, each carrying new information about the rescue efforts.
The operator set type mechanically, his mind elsewhere, on Margaret Krauss, who must be reliving her husband's death with each update. On Catherine Thornton, carrying the weight of her father's sins. On the trapped workers, praying for rescue in the darkness. At 4:30, word came through all 6 maintenance workers had been extracted alive. 2 were critical but expected to survive. The tunnel itself would need complete reconstruction, but no civilians had been harmed. Sam slumped in his chair, exhaustion finally overwhelming adrenaline. We did it. God help us, we actually did it. Walter did it, the operator corrected. We just finally listened to what he was trying to tell us. As evening approached, Joseph Thornton was formally arrested on charges of murder, fraud, and criminal negligence. The newspaper photographer captured him being led away in handcuffs, his empire crumbling in a single day. The operator felt no satisfaction in the image, only a tired recognition of justice served. Margaret Krauss came to the printing floor as the evening shift took over. She carried a small bag which she presented to the operator. These were Walter's personal effects from his desk at home. I thought, since the machine spoke for him, maybe you should have something of his. Inside was a worn leather notebook, a mechanical pencil, and a small framed photograph of Walter and Margaret on their wedding day. Young, hopeful, unaware of what awaited them. The operator accepted them solemnly, understanding the trust being placed in him. I'll keep them safe, he promised. As she left, Frank approached. Hell of a thing we've been through. You realize this story's going to change everything? City Hall, construction contracts, how business gets done in Boston? Change doesn't always last, the operator said, thinking of all the exposés he'd set in type over the years, the brief outrages that faded as new scandals emerged. Maybe not, but sometimes it does. Sometimes a story hits at just the right moment, with just the right force, and things actually get better. The operator hoped Frank was right. He looked at number 7, silent now after its day's labor. Tomorrow was Sunday, the machine would rest. Monday would bring new stories, new truths to set in lead. But for now, in this moment, justice had been served through the strangest of messengers, a ton of steel and brass that had somehow found a way to speak for the dead. He began his evening cleaning ritual, wiping down every surface with unusual care. As he polished the keyboard, he thought he felt a warmth
in the keys, as if invisible hands had been resting there. When he finished, he stood back and regarded the machine. "Thank you," he said quietly, not sure if he was addressing the machine, Walter Krause's spirit, or the mysterious intersection of mechanics and meaning that had made the revelation possible. The building settled into its nighttime quiet, only a skeleton crew remaining to prepare the Sunday edition. The operator gathered his things, including Walter's notebook, and prepared to leave. At the door, he looked back once more at number 7, standing patient and ready in its row, distinguishable from its fellows only to those who knew its secret. Tomorrow, Boston's churches would be full of people discussing the scandal, the corruption, the near tragedy. Sermons would be preached about truth, justice, and the wages of sin. But here, in the cathedral of lead and ink, a different kind of testimony had been given. Stranger, more subtle, but no less powerful. December brought snow to Boston, transforming the grimy industrial district into something almost beautiful. The operator walked to work through the white silence of early morning, his footsteps muffled, his breath visible in the cold air. 6 weeks had passed since Joseph Thornton's arrest, and the city had settled into its new reality, one where powerful men could fall, where truth could emerge from the strangest places. The Herald building felt different now. The employee ownership plan had taken effect, and workers moved with the subtle confidence of people who owned their labor's fruits. The operator had received his first profit-sharing check the previous week. Not a fortune, but enough to fix the roof his wife had been worrying about, enough to feel like more than just hands serving a machine. Number 7 sat in its usual place, patient as always. The operator had developed a new ritual these past weeks. Before beginning his day's work, he would place his hand on the frame and stand quietly for a moment. Not prayer exactly, but acknowledgement. The machine had returned to normal operation. No more mysterious messages, no more impossible alignments. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that it watched, waited, remembered. Tommy Sullivan had married his Mary Catherine the previous Saturday. The operator had attended, along with half the printing floor. The boy had matured visibly in the past weeks, the supernatural events and their aftermath aging him into manhood. He still operated his press, but with new gravity, understanding that their work carried weight beyond wages. "Morning," Frank DiMaggio called out, arriving with his thermos of coffee and unlit cigar. The foreman had been offered a promotion to management, but turned it down. "I belong on the floor," he'd said, "with the machines and the men who understand them." Sam Harrigan appeared around 9, looking healthier than the operator had ever seen him. The story had won him national recognition. Offers had come from papers in New York, Chicago, Washington. But he'd stayed. "Boston's my beat," he'd explained. "Besides, someone needs to keep an eye on number 7, in case it decides to talk again." The operator was setting type for a mundane story about city council elections when Eleanor Blackwood descended to the printing floor. She rarely visited anymore, her point having been made, her debts paid. But today she came directly to number 7. "I wanted you to know," she said quietly. "Margaret Krause has accepted a position at the Boston Public Library. Assistant archivist in the genealogy department. It seems Catherine Thornton recommended her, used what influence she has left." "That's good," the operator said, genuinely pleased. "She deserves some peace. We all do." Whether we get it is another question. Eleanor studied the machine with those sharp eyes that had cataloged 1,000 secrets.
Do you think it will ever happen again? The machine speaking.
The operator considered. Every machine has its limits. Maybe number 7 said what it needed to say.
Or maybe it's waiting for the next story that demands telling.
She smiled slightly.
I prefer that possibility. That somewhere in all this metal and noise, there's room for mystery.
After she left, the operator opened Walter Krause's notebook, which he now kept in his tool drawer. He'd read through it several times, finding notes about municipal bonds, construction costs, the dry mathematics of civic corruption. But on the last page, Walter had written something different. Truth is patient. It can wait years, decades, centuries. But it wants to be known. It will find a way, through documents, through conscience, through dreams, through the smallest crack in the wall we build against it. I may not live to see Thornton fall, but this truth will outlive us both. The operator closed the notebook and returned to his work. The familiar rhythm of the keys, the satisfying chunk of hot metal, the building symphony of production, it all felt right, complete. He thought about Walter's words, about truth's patience. Maybe that's what the machine had known, that truth would find its way, using whatever messenger presented itself. At lunch, he walked through Boston Common, snow crunching beneath his feet. The city continued its ancient dance of commerce and corruption, virtue and vice. The Sumner Tunnel remained closed, its reconstruction funded by seized Thornton Industries assets. Joseph Thornton awaited trial, his lawyers arguing, his fortune evaporating. Catherine Thornton had sold the family mansion, donated the proceeds to a fund for the tunnel workers' families. Near the park center, the operator encountered Margaret Krause feeding pigeons from a bag of breadcrumbs. She looked different, not younger exactly, but unburdened. The black dress was gone, replaced by navy blue. Not quite ready for colors, but moving toward them. "How are you finding the library?" he asked, sitting beside her on the bench.
Peaceful. I'm surrounded by stories, but they're all finished. No surprises, no mysteries. Just records of lives lived.
She scattered more crumbs, watching the birds compete.
I think about him less now. Not because I've forgotten, but because I finally know. The not knowing was worse than the truth.
The truth was terrible.
Yes, but it was truth. That matters.
They sat quietly, watching the pigeons, the snow falling softly around them. Finally, Margaret spoke again.
Do you think the machine really?
I think Walter found a way to tell his story. Whether through supernatural intervention or mechanical coincidence doesn't matter. The story got told. She smiled.
You're right.
The how matters less than the what. Returning to the Herald, the operator found the printing floor in its usual controlled chaos. The afternoon edition was running behind. A press had broken down and everyone was scrambling to compensate. He jumped into the work, fingers flying across number 7's keyboard, setting type at maximum speed. In the midst of this familiar frenzy, he felt it. A slight variation in the machine's rhythm, a hesitation so brief only 20 years of experience could detect it. He looked down to see he'd just set the name Thompson in a classified ad. But for just an instant, the letters had seemed to form something else. A message, a warning, or just his imagination, forever changed by October's impossible events. He continued working, but part of his mind wondered how many other Walter Krauses were out there,
their truths buried, waiting for the right moment, the right messenger.
How many other machines might harbor secrets, their gears and levers holding memories of all the stories that had passed through them? The snow continued falling outside, blanketing Boston in temporary innocence. But beneath the white covering, the city's heart beat on, complex, corrupt, occasionally capable of justice. The operator set type until evening, each letter a small act of faith that truth mattered, that stories deserved telling, that sometimes the universe conspired through the strangest means to deliver justice. As his shift ended, he performed his cleaning ritual one last time for the week. Tomorrow was Sunday. The machines would rest. Monday would bring new stories, new truths, new possibilities for both corruption and revelation. But that was Monday's concern. He stood before number 7, this monument to industrial ingenuity that had somehow become a vehicle for supernatural justice.
Or perhaps not supernatural at all. Perhaps just the inevitable result of truth's pressure, finding release through whatever cracks appeared in reality's firm facade. "Rest well," he told the machine, patting its frame gently. "We've got more stories to tell." Walking home through the December evening, the operator reflected on the strange autumn that had transformed so many lives. He thought about Tommy and Mary Catherine starting their life together, about Catherine Thornton learning to live with conscience instead of comfort, about Margaret Krause finally free to mourn and heal, about Sam Harrigan's Pulitzer nomination, Eleanor's renewed purpose, Frank's quiet pride in his workers' courage. And he thought about himself, still nameless to most, still just the operator of number 7. But he knew something now that he hadn't known before, that ordinary people and ordinary machines could sometimes accomplish extraordinary things. That patient attention to craft and detail could prepare you for the moment when the universe needed a messenger. That truth, as Walter had written, would find a way. The snow fell heavier, transforming the familiar streets into something magical. Somewhere in the city, other injustices festered, other truths waited for discovery. But tonight, walking home to his wife's warm kitchen and the simple pleasure of a job well done, the operator felt something he rarely allowed himself: satisfaction. Number 7 would be waiting Monday morning, ready for another week of transforming events into news, news into type, type into the record of human endeavor. Whether it would ever again serve as truth's supernatural advocate, he couldn't say. But he would be ready if it did, fingers poised over the keys, listening for the ghost in the machine. The city slept under its blanket of snow, and the operator climbed the steps to his row house, stamping his feet clean, ready for Sunday's rest. Behind him, barely visible through the falling snow, the Herald building stood against the night sky, its windows dark except for the night shift's lights. Inside, the great machines waited in mechanical patience, holding their secrets, biding their time.